Hello community, my name is Eduardo and I am originally from Hermosillo, Sonora. I am currently 38 years old. I no longer work in that profession, but when I was 21 and wanted to start working to help my mother with expenses, since she is a single mother, an uncle offered to get me a job in his transportation company. He was going to give me a truck to drive, as there were several companies that hired transporters from his company to move various items. I accepted the job, of course, after training for it because not just anyone can be a truck driver. Everything went well, and I started with short trips, some of which were round trips in a single day. When I had been in the profession for a while and had some experience, my uncle told me I needed to replace a driver from his company who had become seriously ill. The delivery date with the contracting company was already set, so he entrusted me with the job. It was my first job that required more than 2 days of travel. I left very early in the morning and my entire journey was successful. Everything was normal on the way there. I had no setbacks and made the delivery on time. But on the way back, that's when everything happened. Something I can't forget despite the years that have passed. It was already early morning and I was on a highway still far from my city. I had about 13 hours left to go, but I had slept very well and was driving calmly. Suddenly, I felt something was wrong with the truck. It started to brake slightly and the steering wheel became very stiff. I don't know how I managed to pull over and come to a complete stop. I was in the middle of nowhere. There were just some bushes and a few trees with very few cars passing by. It was 2:40 in the morning, and I remember the exact time because I checked my phone before calling my uncle, unsure of what to do. He told me he would call a company he worked with that repairs trucks, but he said I might have to wait until morning since they only worked during the day. After a few minutes, he called me back, confirming that they would try to arrive by 8 in the morning only because it was for him. Still, I would have to spend the night in that place. Well, it can't be helped, I said to myself. I went to the cabin and lay down in the bunk. I took off my boots and tried to sleep, but I wasn't sleepy at all since, as I mentioned earlier, I had slept very well before hitting the road. So I just lay there waiting for the hours to pass, with my eyes closed and my mind wandering when suddenly, I started hearing a whistle outside, and soon there were several. I jumped up, peered out a bit without moving to the front seats, but I couldn't see anyone. In fact, I couldn't see anything because it was too dark. I just made sure the doors were locked and sat in the bunk, still hearing those whistles getting closer. Suddenly I heard small laughs. I say small because they sounded like children's, and it was as if they were mocking me but in a very low tone. This terrified me because it was clear they couldn't be children, not in that place and not at that hour. I tried to calm myself, unsure whether to call my uncle again because I didn't want to bother him. I knew he had to get up early for work, but I was very scared. The laughter didn't stop and grew louder and closer until I suddenly felt a slight movement in the truck, as if it were being shaken from side to side. I peered out to see the mirrors, but I couldn't see anyone. It was completely useless to try to see anything in that darkness. I just lay down and covered my face with a pillow, trying not to listen. But then I heard cries. This time, they were no longer children's voices but adult voices, begging for help and pleading for me to let them in. The second I heard those horrible laments, they started laughing again, mocking me once more, and their voices grew deeper and deeper. My mother is very devout in the Catholic faith, and although I'm not, thanks to her, I knew how to pray. At that moment, it was all I could do, so I started saying prayers out loud, clenching my fists out of fear and keeping my eyes tightly shut, not wanting to see anything outside, knowing I wouldn't be able to handle it. Seconds later, I clearly heard someone or something with a very deep voice shouting blasphemies against God, mocking my prayers. At that moment, I saw the lights of a car approaching. I immediately moved to the front seat to turn on the lights, signaling for help, but the car drove past. And I understand. You can't risk helping someone in the middle of nowhere at that hour of the night. I noticed that when the car passed, all those noises stopped. I took the opportunity to open the door and peek out, but there was no one, and I was completely alone. I called my uncle again, feeling very embarrassed but utterly terrified, not knowing what to do. It was almost 5 in the morning, and I knew he usually got up around that time. which is why I dared to call him again. I briefly told him what had happened and said I didn't know what to do, but I wanted to leave. I couldn't stand being in that place and situation anymore. He tried to calm me down and said he would call again to see if they could come earlier, and then hung up. After that, my phone battery died, but it was already getting light. When daylight finally came, I dared to get out of the truck. I carefully climbed down and first checked to see if anyone was around. The first thing I noticed was animal tracks around the truck. There were no human footprints, only animal tracks. There was more traffic on the highway, so I felt a bit more at ease. The sunlight illuminated the entire area, and help finally arrived. Despite the inexplicable nightmare I lived through, I continued driving my truck and worked in that profession for 3 more years until I went to college. I hope you enjoyed listening to my story. I didn't enjoy living it at all. Despite being such a horror fan, it's very different when it happens to you, and I honestly wouldn't wish it on anyone. Good evening, I'm a fan of the channel and today I want to share my story with you, but without revealing my name, as I don't want to affect the loved ones of the protagonist of this tale. I've been a truck driver for 30 years. From the first time I took a trip in my trailer, I knew I was born for this. I enjoyed it immensely, and to this day, it remains my job. I've never seen witches or demons on the roads like some of my colleagues have told me. They've experienced all sorts of paranormal things, and although this story falls into that category, it has nothing to do with those kinds of things. I remember that back then I began having a very recurring dream. Almost every night I dreamed the same thing and woke up somewhat scared and confused. My dream went like this. I dreamed that I was driving my truck on a road I frequently traveled for my deliveries. There are large rocks on the sides and cliffs as well. I was driving there at night, and always in the same stretch, when suddenly I saw an old friend from high school standing there. I had lost touch with him, and currently knew nothing about his life. He was standing there at the edge of that road, just watching me. I would stop to help him, but as soon as I stopped my truck, I would wake up suddenly, not understanding why I had dreamed of him since it had been so long since I last saw him, and I knew nothing about him. The strangest and most concerning part was when I started dreaming this almost every night. I was already desperate and didn't know what to do to stop dreaming it. I was frustrated not having an answer as to why I was dreaming the same thing and the same person all the time. I think it was about 2 months of having that dream. Of course, during that time I continued working and frequently passed by that road and that specific stretch, but of course there was never anyone there. I remember searching for my old friend on social media, but I never found him. It seemed he didn't have an account on any platform. Honestly, I didn't even know why I was looking for him. I suppose I just wanted to know he was okay, but I never found him. None of my other former classmates knew anything about him either since then. I even asked a few I still had in my contacts. In fact, I told one of them, who I was still friends with, why I was looking for him, and he said he would try to find him for me. 2 months passed and I had to make another delivery in my truck, where I would again pass by that road and that same stretch. It was past midnight when I was about to pass by there, and suddenly I saw him. He was standing there just like in my dream, in the same position and in the same place, even wearing the same green shirt he had in my dream. I swear I almost lost control. I didn't know if I was dreaming or if it was really happening, but I was very shocked. I managed to stop a bit further ahead from where he was, and I stayed there, not getting out of the truck, but I could see him in the side mirror from the passenger side. At that moment, I didn't understand anything. I didn't know if my dream was a premonition that this would happen, or if it was déjà vu. But I felt scared. My body told me not to get out, and I only felt on high alert. I just saw in the mirror that he raised his hand like saying hello or goodbye, and then he walked into the darkness, towards that cliff. I reacted and accelerated, leaving without getting out to find out what was happening. I trusted my intuition not to, though I don't know if I did the right thing or not. It was simply how I reacted at that moment. 2 days after returning from my delivery, I received a message from my high school friend, the one who said he would help me find him, and what he told me is the most shocking part of this story. I managed to find his brother. I found his profile because he was in my older sister's class, and that's how she remembered his name to look him up. But I don't have good news, he told me. I replied, asking him to tell me what he knew, as something very strange had happened to me. But before I could tell him, I received another message from him saying, I talked to his brother under the pretext of wanting to know what had happened to the person we were looking for. I made up that we wanted to organize a class reunion, but what he told me was unexpected. He told me his brother had been in a car accident just over 2 months ago, on the same road from your dream, and that he had been in the hospital, in a coma, all that time. And 2 days ago, he passed away. I swear I couldn't believe what I was reading, especially because the dates of my dreams matched the time he had been in a coma. But then why did I see him? Why did he appear to me on the road just 2 days ago when he had supposedly just passed away? This is something that, to this day, leaves me and my family in awe, as we don't know why he appeared in my dreams, and why specifically to me, when we hadn't seen each other in years, and we didn't even have each other on social media. I don't understand what he wanted to tell me or why it was me he appeared to that night on that road, in the same place where he likely lost his life. I don't have an answer for you, as I am still searching for it since all this happened. After that, I never dreamed of him again. It's been years since all this happened, but I still have more questions than answers. I just wish he is resting in peace and has found the light and is not a tormented soul. Thank you for listening to my story. Greetings to all. Hello, horror community. My name is Fernando Meza, and I want to share something very intense that happened to my father, who is a truck driver. He gave me his permission to share this with all of you, but I will omit his name. As I mentioned earlier, he has been a truck driver for many years. He started this job when I was very young. Although he initially said he would do it temporarily to support our family, he couldn't leave it because he ended up enjoying it a lot and it also paid well. My sister and I grew up with his road stories. Many are adventurous, and a few are horror stories about organized crime. But there is one that stands out among all of them, and it is this one that I am going to tell you, because I believe it is the only paranormal experience my father has ever had on the road, and it is very delicate and intense. In 2019, he was driving on border highways, taking a load to Ciudad Juarez, and night fell during the journey. He says that everything was calm. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened throughout the trip. He was listening to the radio while eating some snacks, but suddenly he saw 2 silhouettes standing by the side of the road in the distance with his truck's lights. He slowed down and saw that it was a man and a woman who were asking for a ride, or rather help, as they looked desperate. My father says he didn't know whether to stop because we all know the dangers that exist nowadays, and you can't just pick up strangers like that. But when he passed by them, he saw that there was a small child between them. He says the child didn't look more than 6 years old. And that's why he decided to stop, because he couldn't leave the little one in such a dangerous situation. My father pulled over and stopped the truck, but when he got out, he only saw the child. He was a small, defenseless child standing there looking at him with a scared face, probably thinking that my father was going to hurt him. My father approached the child slowly, telling him not to be afraid, that he only wanted to help him, but the child said nothing. He just had his face full of fear, not taking his eyes off my father. When my father finally reached the child, he asked where his parents or the people who were with him a few moments ago had gone. But the child said he was alone and told him that bad people had shot his parents and left him there alone and then drove off. My father wanted to cry because of the impact of the situation, but he held back to avoid scaring the child, who, he says, had an accent from another country. It seemed that he and his parents were migrants, crossing through there to reach the United States. My father took the child to Ciudad Juarez, where he handed him over to the authorities so they could look for any relatives of his in the country he was from. He wanted to do more for the child, but he didn't know what else to do. All the way back, my father cried thinking about that little boy, whose parents had been taken from him in such a cruel way right in front of him, and also thinking that he saw them next to the child, taking care of him, looking for someone who could help him on that road. Yes, it is a paranormal story, but above all, it is a sad one. Thank you all for your attention. Good night.